Alright, perfect. And we're live. So, welcome to everybody this is their first time watching. This is the ConsciousQueries podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Persicino. And I have a very special guest today that's coming us from Japan, of all places. So, let's get right into it. You are the cryptocurrency guru, from all I can tell. So for me, cryptocurrency was always something really that came out of nowhere, out of the internet age, and then, people started using it as a really reliable source, and people were actually investing in it, and people were really taking it seriously, and it making really big waves around the world, and it's really changing the way we see banking, how we see how we see financial institutions. So from a standpoint where I'm from Canada, and in North America it's kind of the financial culture here is very investing and very big on that kind of short-term gains and very profitable incomes, and what's your take on kind of the North Americans' reaction as opposed to Europe or Asia's kind of reaction to cryptocurrency?
Definitely good question. So I think a lot of my friends in the past year or two that have they knew I was into Bitcoin and trading cryptocurrencies. They would approach me out of the blue, kind of when the price started going up, and they would ask me my advice if they should start investing in Bitcoin or Ethereum or all these different cryptocurrencies. And my response is always, I can't make that decision for you. It's a financial decision, so I would just tell them to manage their risk and be careful and not spend what they're not willing to lose. So one of the reasons that the price kind of, so I'll answer your question in a second, but I guess one of the reasons that we've had so much kind of mania just in the past year and a half is because there was a point that people realized all over the world, not just in developed countries, that you could buy cryptocurrencies with just $1. There was very, very low barrier to entry. So unlike a lot of financial assets and instruments where you need $5,000 or $10,000 or a bank account, you actually could just get a Bitcoin or any other token for anyone that had it, and there was no restriction on that. So once people realized that, and then they also saw that prices were going 10x or 20x, I think a lot of people got excited.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we see in the West, and that's what a lot of people talk about, and that's what you see in the media. But really, I don't think from Bitcoin, talking about Bitcoin specifically, I don't think there's been a huge use case, right? Because you and I, we can go down to the 7-Eleven, the convenience store. We can buy something with our credit card, and it's not an issue. We don't have to worry about the card not working, and we don't have to worry about our banks defaulting on our loans and our ATMs not working.
Yeah.
But in the rest of the world, money does face borders and serious restrictions. So you have national currencies that are badly managed. A lot of it stemming from political mismanagement. Venezuela is a great example. We've got Greece, Cyprus, Zimbabwe is the classic example. And even personally, I've had that experience where I was in India, and I had to walk like 2 miles to find an ATM that actually had cash in it. And I tried like 7 different ATMs. And so these are problems that people have in primarily developing countries, but we don't really think about restrictions on the free flow of money in the West because we have these stable banks. So for those people in developing countries, Bitcoin offers, I believe, a safe haven. And for people in the rest of the world, in developed countries, I think it simply gives us an option. We've got pounds, euros, dollars, and now we have Bitcoin. So that's kind of how I see it right now when we're talking about the cryptocurrency side of things.
Well, that's definitely a really good answer. But it's also, like you were saying, the stability of developed countries' banking systems, and that's really a good standpoint where people feel, have that trust in those institutions.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting from seeing the craze of cryptocurrencies, where you have young teenagers becoming millionaires overnight, in certain extreme cases becoming instant celebrities because of that.
Yeah.
It's and then everybody, because of that, they say, well, if it's them, let's go buy I'll put all my life savings in that, and I'll make some money too. It's like, well, by that point it's already too late. If you're watching it on the news, it's not a good it's not a good point to start investing at that point. That's
absolutely. Like right now, it's interesting. You had Bitcoin, 2018 went from $6,000 to $10,000, then $20,000 in just a few weeks. And like you said, they're just investor emotions are tied to price.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the market, right? So everyone, all these retail investors, we call them, to jump in, and CNBC is saying, this is how you buy Bitcoin. And then literally the next week, when the price plummets, it's like, this is how you sell Bitcoin.
That's right.
It's so funny to watch it happening. And the thing is, like right now, the price is relatively low, depending on how you value that and who you ask, but compared to a year ago. And so it's around 4,000 right now. And so now is the time when people should be excited, right?
Yeah.
Now is the time when you should be coming in and saying, oh wow, the price is like 300, 400% lower than it was a few months ago. Maybe this is an interesting opportunity, but the way that it went was people got scared off and the price plummeted. And now it's really the smart investors and the institutions and the banks that are coming in and building their own cryptocurrencies. And I think there's a lot happening in the background that is that's
absolutely true. There's actually a really funny case in Canada. I have a friend that worked at the Canadian Mint, and the Canadian Mint in Canada is the people that print the money, and they're kind of that kind of important institution. And it's funny because they started their own cryptocurrencies in the early days of cryptocurrencies, and the government, I heard that the boss, whoever was in charge, told them to sell it and to get rid of it, and that it was not in their mandate to have an online. They were going to use it like as gift cards and like to pay on their like website to buy the coins and stuff. And it was like, they were like, oh, you can have an online currency, and then they said nope, scrap that, sell that. And then but that's interesting that now we have Sweden and countries starting their own cryptocurrencies. And at that point it's like, well, if it's insured and guaranteed by the state, it's not a bad investment at that point. It's like that's kind of a game changer. It really brings on more credibility to it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look around the world right now, I mean, I'm not keeping track of what every single country is doing in crypto, but in Japan, so I live in Tokyo, I've been here for 6 years, and it's a very progressive country when it comes to crypto. One reason is because we had Mt. Gox, which is the big exchange hack a few years ago, and I actually lived right across the street from the exchange. I didn't know it until years later, but because that happened, because we had the big exchange hack here, the government stepped in and they wanted to protect consumers, so they created regulations really early on, before most countries in the world. That way, when crypto did kind of start to gain adoption, there were already rules in place. So it's very clear what the laws are here in Japan. And you've got the largest bank in Japan that's actually starting their own crypto, kind of like JP Morgan is doing. And you've got a lot of large electronics retailers here that are accepting Bitcoin. So all these things are starting to happen at a very institutional level, and businesses are starting to adopt this. But it's very fragmented, right? It's just little things happening here and there, and most people aren't looking at that on a daily basis. They're not seeing what is being built. They're seeing more of the price kind of volatility. So that's where we have to kind of separate things: the price, and then there's the actual fundamental technology and what's happening.
That's very true. And I feel like when it started, the really big deal out of it was the anonymous part of it, the fact that you can use it, and it's not traceable to a banking or institution or the Visa. So it's really interesting that people opted to that because people don't want their information being collected and being sold and being transferred,
Yeah.
and that's kind of really weird that human beings and people are really kind of finding ways around the system that still work for everyone, but at the end undermines some of the institutions that want to profit the most. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that one of the big takeaways I got from speaking to lots of different blockchain startup CEOs was this idea that this is disruptive, obviously, but disruption doesn't happen in a day. And while we see this kind of wild price speculation, blockchain is not really synonymous with short-term gains. It's going to take 5, 10, 15 years before some of these projects actually come to fruition. And there's been people working on stuff for years now. And the products just take so long to build because things are evolving so quickly, and there's scalability issues. So I think it's a matter of time, but it's also worth noting that you know we shouldn't really be fighting against financial institutions, I think, because they're the incumbents, and they're not going to be going away tomorrow, right? I mean, they essentially control the world in many ways. So there has to be a way for us to work with financial institutions, and I think that's something that a lot of crypto people, kind of crypto anarchists and Bitcoin maximalists will miss. I just don't think it works in the long term, right? You have to kind of come to some compromises and work together.
Well, absolutely. Well, I think of mainstream. I saw an article that came out this morning on CoinDesk, and it was they launched an $80 smartphone that rewards users with cryptocurrencies. So that's really interesting, and I was really amazed that that was kind of where things were headed with that, and we'll see how well that does.
Adoption is low just for the average person in the developed country because of the user interface and user experience. So having a phone that is, I don't know exactly what that phone was, but if there is like a built-in a chip that's kind of like a secure Trezor or secure storage for your crypto, and that's separated from kind of the main interface, and you're able to kind of trade crypto natively with that. I think that's huge, right? Because right now it's still kind of you still have to wrap your head around crypto when you're buying your first Bitcoin. It's kind of difficult, right? It's a bit clunky. You have to go download this browser and or kind of download this wallet, and then
it can definitely be very intimidating for people who've never done it before, and it's can especially for my parents who it was so funny because for the longest time it was, don't spend money on the internet, don't you put your credit card there, and don't you do anything like that and buy things on the internet. And now it's completely the opposite, where it's like, well, it's the norm to buy everything on the internet, so it only makes sense to use a currency that just you don't even need a Visa card at that point.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. So do your parents own cryptocurrencies now, or?
Definitely not. They're definitely old-fashioned. They keep all their savings in banks, like most of their generation, I think. I feel like that's something that that's a bit more generational, and cryptocurrency is younger generation, since we're born with more technology in our hands. We're more used to it, and we're more able to adapt to it, to the changes that come out of it. And that's to each their own, but there's no denying that it is a huge opportunity for a lot of people, and it does have a lot of benefits to it too.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Dogecoin?
I am not. That's is that one specific to Asia, or is it specifically?
No, it kind of gained popularity a few years ago. So it's based on this like internet meme of the Shiba Inu dog, which is like a famous dog in Japan actually. So there's some connection there. But it was basically made as kind of a joke cryptocurrency, but it basically blew up on Reddit and just gained a really strong following and community. And back in 2014, I believe, the Sochi Olympics, Winter Olympics, they sponsored the like the Reddit community raised like $20,000 or $30,000 in Dogecoin and sponsored the Jamaican bobsled team to go out to the Olympics, and that was just a totally kind of random thing, and with this currency that it was kind of a joke almost, but it still exists, and it's still a very strong community, but it's very hard for someone in their 40s or 50s to understand that concept. Like, what is this Dogecoin thing, and how does it have any value? So I agree. I think there's certainly a generational gap that it makes it very tough to have a conversation about this sometimes.
Well, I mean, that's exactly the point, and even for me, I remember grasping the beginning of Bitcoin, and it's like there's a million different ones, and it's like, well, how do they have, how do they attain value, and how does money be created out of nowhere, if anything? And through Bitcoins, there was something about mining data in computer banks, and that's through the cloud. You have to pay to buy data banks mining, and then apparently there's only a certain amount of internet mining that's capable. So, and I'm like, whoa, my God, this is based on a lot of algorithms that I do not understand.
Yeah.
So
well look, I think you don't have to necessarily understand all the technical aspects of internet protocols, or how an airplane works, or how a car works, right? But we still put trust in those things, and we still use them every day. It's actually pretty amazing how much trust we put in some things, like our banks, right?
Yeah.
What do we really know about where our money is being spent and how it's being spent? And I think Bitcoin is certainly not to the stage yet where people are just like throwing all their trust into it. There are some people, like you said, that put their whole life savings into it, but I think that we don't necessarily nobody needs to really understand the technology other than the people that are building companies around it. For the average consumer, as long as it works and they can trust it, and the user interface works, and there's a strong use case, then I think it's enough. I think it's a strong enough use case.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty good. So I mean, when we see, before there was a large backlash at the beginning from the bankings. Now they're really adapting to it, and they're accepting that it's a part of reality, and that they have to adapt with it. It's where do you see the next 5 to 10 years turning forward?